I was 8 when my brother first called me trash. It wasn't subtle either. He said it with disgust, while throwing my worn-out backpack across the hallway. I remember how his voice echoed through the small house, how even the walls seemed to flinch. We lived under the same roof, but he treated me like I was some stray dog my parents forgot to get rid of. He had nicer clothes, better toys, more attention. I had silence and scraped knees, and no one ever asked why I cried myself to sleep. My mother always said, "He's just a boy. Boys tease." But this wasn't teasing. This was cruelty with calculation. He would wait until guests arrived and then humiliate me, make jokes about my hand-me-down shoes. Sometimes he whispered that I wasn't even his real sister, that I was adopted from a dumpster. When I'd run to my father, he'd shrug and say, "Don't be so sensitive, you're a tough girl, aren't you?" But inside, I was shrinking. I was learning to disappear. At school, I stayed quiet. I sat at the back and watched other kids laugh like life didn't weigh on them. I wondered what it felt like to be light, to not carry shame like a second skin. I got good at hiding my hunger, at chewing slower to make lunch last longer. I learned how to copy homework answers without getting caught, and I began to dream not of love, but of power. Because love had failed me, but power, I believed, would make them see. My brother's name opened doors. He was tall, charming, the golden boy of the family. He spoke and people listened. He smiled and people leaned closer. I studied him like a science. How he tilted his head when lying, how he used silence as a weapon. He never hit me, but he made me feel invisible, and that was worse. So I promised myself one thing. Someday, I'd make him see me. Not as trash, not as a joke, but as someone who could end him. At 16, I got my first job, cleaning offices after school. While he was out partying with friends from his fancy internship, I was scrubbing toilets. The janitor, Mr. Harris, saw something in me. "You got grit," he said. "Don't lose it." He taught me things no one else bothered to. How companies worked, how people in power moved. I listened. I asked questions. I stayed late, took notes on napkins and old receipts. And slowly, I built a new version of myself, one that didn't beg to be loved. When I turned 18, I left home without looking back. No note, no goodbye, just silence, the same kind I grew up with. I enrolled in community college by day and worked night shifts by dawn. It wasn't glamorous. I ate noodles for weeks and slept 4 hours a night, but something inside me had hardened, like steel forged in fire. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was chasing control. By 21, I had my degree in business and my first real offer. A startup in logistics, small but ambitious. I worked like a machine. 12-hour days, cold calls, learning every layer of the operation. People mocked me for being too serious, too intense, just like they mocked me in childhood. But I knew what they didn't. I wasn't building a resume. I was building a weapon. Every promotion was a step closer to something bigger, something personal. Meanwhile, my brother was plateauing. He'd gotten a cushy job at a mid-sized firm, thanks to a college friend. He posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn and took selfies at company retreats. Everyone called him future executive material. But I knew the truth. He hadn't built anything. He was just coasting on charm and connections. But fate has a wicked sense of humor. Because that company, it was next on my radar. My firm began expanding, merging, acquiring. I sat at the table with investors twice my age and negotiated like I had nothing to lose. Because I didn't. Not anymore. I'd already lost a childhood. What was there left to fear? When the name of my brother's company came up in the buyout list, I didn't flinch. I simply said, Let's run the numbers. And the numbers loved me. 2 months later, I signed the papers that made me owner of the company my brother worked for. Not CEO, owner, majority stakeholder. The look on his face when he walked into that meeting room. It was the first time I saw his mask crack. And, for once, I wasn't the invisible one. I was the storm. He tried to act normal. Sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, smirk in place. But his eyes kept flicking to mine, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I introduced myself to the room as the new majority investor, and his jaw clenched hard. He waited for me to flinch, to slip, to prove I didn't belong. But I stood tall, in heels I bought with my own damn money, and said clearly, "This isn't personal, it's business, and I take both very seriously." He cornered me after the meeting, voice low, smile fake. "What the hell is this? Some revenge fantasy?" he hissed. I stared at him like I was looking at a stranger. "No," I said. "This is justice. You just happen to be standing in the way." He laughed, loud, nervous. "You think you're better than me now?" I leaned in, whispered, "I've always been better. You just refuse to see it." The weeks that followed were awkward, for him. He avoided eye contact in the halls, skipped meetings I attended. Rumors started flying. Who was this young woman reshaping the company? Some thought I slept my way to the top. Others said I must be a prodigy. No one guessed the truth, that I had been forged in humiliation and hunger. And now I was building something no one could take from me. Not even him. One afternoon, I called him into my office. He arrived late, phone in hand, not even pretending to respect the power shift. I told him calmly, "We're restructuring. Your position is under review." His smirk vanished. "You can't do that. I've been here for years." I raised an eyebrow. "Exactly. And you've done very little with them." He stormed out. But this time he didn't slam the door. He knew better. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city skyline. The lights looked different now, like I was finally inside the world I used to watch from below. But I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt empty. Power had filled the space where pain once lived, but only for a moment. Was this what I wanted? To become the villain in his story? Or had I just rewritten mine in blood and signatures? I took a leave of absence the next week, something no one saw coming. Let the board handle the noise. I needed silence, space. I went back to the town I once fled from, back to the cracked sidewalks and rusted fences. People barely recognized me. Some stared, some smiled, some asked for a job, but I wasn't there for them. I was chasing ghosts, pieces of a girl I left behind. And I found her sitting on the old swing behind the schoolyard, in my mind. I walked through our old house, now empty, cold, for sale. The floor still creaked the same way it did when I used to sneak out at night. I stood in the room where he first pushed me against the wall for breaking his CD. Where my father yelled, where my mother cried, where silence taught me its language. And I said aloud, "You didn't break me." Then I walked out without looking back. Back in the city, things had shifted. My brother had been demoted, not by me, but by the board after his performance review. I hadn't needed to lift a finger. His arrogance had been his own undoing. He sent me an email, short, bitter, unsigned. "You win." I read it once, then deleted it, because I hadn't won. I had survived. And that's not the same thing. It's harder. I started mentoring girls from underfunded schools. They reminded me of myself, eyes hungry for something they couldn't name. I told them what no one told me, that pain isn't weakness, it's blueprint, that poverty doesn't disqualify you, It prepares you. That revenge might feel good, but purpose feels better. And slowly, the steel inside me turned back into something soft. A year later, my brother showed up at one of the talks. He sat in the back, quiet, alone, older than I remembered. When it ended, he waited as the crowd cleared, then approached me. He didn't say much, just looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Your voice," he murmured, "it's powerful." I smiled, nodded, and replied, "It always was. You just couldn't hear it before." He asked if we could talk, privately, somewhere quiet. I agreed, not out of obligation, but because something in his eyes had shifted. We sat on a bench near the venue, the wind colder than I remembered. For a moment, he just looked down, twisting his hands like he was still that teenage boy. "I was cruel to you," he finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "No excuses, no reasons, just, I was." I nodded. No need to confirm what we both knew. "I think I hated how much you didn't need anyone," he added. I laughed, bitterly. I needed everyone. No one came. His head dropped. I knew. And I still chose to step on you. There was silence between us, not like the old silence. This one had weight. A silence where truths floated, finally ready to be held. "I envied you," he said. "You could survive without charm, without shortcuts." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the cracks. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. The shine had dulled. He was just a man, aging, tired, watching the world spin without him. "You could have asked me to teach you," I replied. "I was your sister, not your competition." He exhaled hard, like something sharp had left his chest. "I thought strength meant stepping on others before they stepped on you." I shook my head. "Real strength is standing even when no one's looking." He looked out into the city, like it held answers he couldn't find in me. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I was a coward." And I believed him, because cowards don't usually say it out loud. He stood, offered his hand. "If you ever want to talk again." I stood too, but didn't take it. "I'll let you know." He nodded, accepting the boundary. No begging, no drama. Just two people who had shared a house, a past, and a pain, and finally named it. As he walked away, I felt lighter. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed him to say it. Months passed. Seasons changed. So did I. I stepped down as majority stakeholder, not out of defeat, but evolution. I didn't need control to prove my worth anymore. Let someone else play chess with titles and power moves. I was done playing games that only led to emptiness. I wanted to build, not conquer. I started my own venture, a consulting firm focused on ethical leadership. Yes, it sounded idealistic, but so was surviving a home that tried to erase me. I hired women who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. I taught them what Mr. Harris once taught me, with more fire. And when I saw them rise, I felt something deeper than revenge. Redemption. Because helping someone else win heals you in ways victory never can. Occasionally, I'd hear about my brother through mutual contacts. He had left the company shortly after I did, moved to a quieter city, started a nonprofit for at-risk youth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The bully now trying to protect the bullied. Maybe guilt had transformed him. Maybe not. But I no longer cared about the answer. One night, I got a letter. Handwritten. From him. He said he still carried the echo of his cruelty, like a shadow that wouldn't fade. But that seeing me speak, seeing me lead, It shook something loose. "I wanted to destroy you," he wrote, "because deep down, I knew you'd outshine me." I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer. I didn't need it, but I kept it as proof that the past can be named and survived. Years later, a journalist interviewed me for a feature on self-made women. She asked me what I'd say to my younger self if I could go back. I thought of the girl with scraped knees and a stitched-up backpack. I smiled and said, "She wasn't made. She was forged." Because everything I was now, every word, every step, was built from the ashes of every time I was told I wouldn't matter. After the article went live, I received messages from strangers. Some were young women telling me they saw themselves in my story. Others were older men, ashamed, saying they recognized their past behavior in my brother. And then, there were the silent ones, the ones who never said a word but showed up differently. In boardrooms, in meetings, in how they looked at the girl with the secondhand shoes. The ripple had begun, and it wasn't about me anymore. I spoke at schools, prisons, corporations. Each time I told them the same truth. Pain is information. Don't ignore it. I didn't wear expensive brands. I wore my past. I let the cracks show, because that's where the light came through. And when I talked about my brother, I didn't vilify him. I spoke of what silence does to a house and what shame does to a boy. I met a young man once, after a panel, who waited until everyone left. He said, "My sister won't talk to me. I did things I can't undo." I looked him in the eye and said, "Then don't try to undo them. Outgrow them." He nodded, tears brimming, and walked away taller. It was in that moment I realized something unexpected. My brother's story wasn't just his. It belonged to many. People asked why I never pressed charges or sued for emotional abuse, why I didn't fire him immediately or crush him publicly. But vengeance is loud and often empty. What I wanted was quieter, slower, and far more dangerous. I wanted to become someone he couldn't erase, outshine, or forget. And I did, not through revenge, but through reinvention. Sometimes I think back to that night he whispered, "You win." And I wonder what he meant. Was it a surrender? A confession? A warning? But then I remember, I wasn't playing a game. There was no scoreboard, no final buzzer. Just a girl who became a storm no one saw coming. One autumn, years later, we crossed paths again, this time at a conference. He was invited to speak about leadership through failure. I was there to close the event with a keynote on resilience. We didn't acknowledge each other publicly, but our eyes met once. And that was enough. A silent nod between two people who had once been enemies. Enemies raised under the same roof. After my speech, he approached me. He had aged a little, more softness in his face now. "You were brilliant," he said. "But I always knew you would be." This time I smiled without bitterness. "You never said that before." He shrugged. "I couldn't see you clearly before. I only saw my own fear." I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Fear makes poor mirrors." We walked together for a while, not as siblings, but as survivors. He told me about the kids he worked with, how he saw himself in every lost boy. He said helping them was the only thing that made him sleep at night. I told him he didn't owe me redemption. He replied, "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the version of me that could have been you." And I believed him, not just because I wanted to. We parted ways quietly. No grand gestures. No promises. Just the understanding that some wounds never close. They just stop bleeding. And some stories don't need revenge to find closure. Sometimes just being alive, thriving, is the loudest justice of all. I never expected peace from him. But I found peace anyway, because I stopped needing him to give it. That night, I wrote one final note in my journal. Forgiveness doesn't mean he was right. It means I choose not to be wronged forever. I closed the book and went to sleep without nightmares. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of the past. I dreamed of nothing, and sometimes, nothing is the most beautiful thing of all. I never returned to that house we grew up in. It was sold years ago to a family with 3 daughters and a golden retriever. Sometimes I imagine them laughing in those same rooms where I used to cry. Not out of envy, but hope that the house had learned gentleness. Pain leaves behind a scent, but maybe joy can wash it out over time. Or maybe children just teach places how to heal. People still ask about the company, if I regret stepping down, if I'd ever go back and take the reins again. But my answer is always the same. I didn't build a company. I built myself. That was always the real mission. Not revenge, not success, not wealth. Just a woman trying to reassemble her pieces into something solid, something that wouldn't fall apart the next time someone called her worthless. I visit schools more than boardrooms now. Sometimes, a girl with shy eyes will linger at the end of a workshop. She'll hold her notebook like a shield and ask, "How did you know you were enough?" And I always pause, because the truth is, I didn't. Not until years of being told I wasn't became fuel, not fire. Not until I realized that the ones who break us can't define us. My brother's nonprofit grew. He was on the news once, speaking gently to a room full of boys. He didn't mention me. He didn't need to. Our story was never meant for headlines or hashtags. It was a quiet redemption, slow, flawed, unfinished. I used to think healing would come with a bang, with applause. But it came in a whisper, and that was enough. Sometimes we text on holidays. No family photos, no forced nostalgia. Just 2 people who know what it means to survive each other. We don't say "I love you," we say "take care." And in that, there's a kind of grace, a soft truth between the lines. We weren't the storybook siblings, but we became the kind that learned to stop the cycle. And maybe that's even more powerful than love. One spring morning, I stood in front of a full auditorium. A banner behind me read, "The Power of Becoming." I looked at the sea of faces, young, old, broken, brilliant, and I began not with my success, but with my scars. I told them about the hallway, the backpack, the boy who called me trash, and how I used every insult as a brick to build my empire. I spoke about failure, how it taught me more than victory ever could, how being poor wasn't a flaw, but a forge, how silence doesn't make you invisible, it makes you listen better, and how even the cruelest chapter in your story can become your introduction. The room was quiet, not out of boredom, but reverence. They weren't just hearing my story. They were recognizing their own. Afterward, a woman in her 40s came up to me, eyes full. "I was the bully," she said. "In high school, I ruined people." I didn't flinch. I just asked, "And now?" She nodded slowly. "Now, I fix what I can, and I teach my kids better." That's the thing about pain. When we carry it well, it teaches others how to carry theirs, even if we were once the ones causing it. Years ago, I wanted power to prove I wasn't weak. Now I use it to prove others are strong. I used to dream of making my brother kneel. Now I dream of helping girls rise. And somewhere in that shift, I found something I never thought I would. Not victory, not revenge, but peace, the kind that doesn't need to be loud. I never did tell him everything I wanted to. Never recited the list of nights I cried because of him. Never made him feel the weight of what he'd done. Because by the time I could, I didn't need to. And maybe that's the real end of the story. Not when he said sorry, but when I no longer needed him to.